Hi there and welcome to another HTMX tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to extend the application that we previously built, and we're going to include a very basic search component that uses HTMX to dynamically get search results and return them to the front end. And we're also going to show another few features of HTMX in this tutorial. This is what we want to build by the end of this tutorial. So if we search for films, we want to be able to get a list of films that are not already in our list. So we're filtering out the films that are already in the list. And we want to be able to type and have that dynamically update each time we type. That's the goal. And when we add a film to the list, we want to see it appear here with a message at the top. And as you can see, the message disappears after 3 seconds. So that's the goal. Let's see how to build that using HTMX. And we're also going to fix a couple of issues with the application we've built so far. So let's get started by fixing a few of the problems from the previous tutorials. I'm in the views.py file just now, and what we're going to fix is this problem here. If I load up the films page, this should only be accessible to logged in users because the model, which you can view here, is linked to a user, so there has to be a user for this to work. Now if I log out of this page and then try and re-access this, you see we're getting an error here, and that's because anonymous users cannot have the attribute films in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to views.py and we're going to protect this film list. I've imported a few things here that we're going to use to fix a few problems. The login required mixin. It's a mixin that you can apply to class-based views such as the film list. We can pass it in here, and you can see what this is going to do is it's going to prevent users from accessing this page, and it's going to throw a 404 not found. So if we refresh, you see page not found. This can be customized even further. You can redirect the user to login pages. We're not going to do that, but this shows you that the login required mixin is something that you can apply to a class-based view. I also imported another a decorator from the Django auth package, and that's the login required decorator. This can be applied to function-based views, and we're going to do it to the add film view, for example, because we don't want people who are adding a film to be unauthenticated, so we will use login required there. And same for deleting films. This is only for an individual user, so we're going to add login required. You must be logged in to perform this request. Now the delete film view also has another problem. At the moment it's removing a primary key, but it's not limited to just delete requests. We could send a post or a put request to this endpoint and it's still going to access the function and run it. So I have a final import here called require HTTP methods. This is from Django's views.decorators.http module, and what we can do here is we can use a decorator called require HTTP methods, and we're going to limit that to just a delete request. So now only delete requests will work, and that will protect that view from being accessed by a post or a put request by accident. Just a bit of extra security here, and it's a bit more explicit that this is only for delete requests. So let's now get into the HTMX portion of this tutorial. So this film list is rendered in the film list partial here, and you can see that we've got a list attribute with the film's name, and we've got some HTMX here. So we're going to extend this, and I'm going to create 2 sections on the page so that the left hand side of the page contains the list and the right hand side contains a search component. So I'm going to copy paste a few things in here. We're going to create a section for the list, and that will encompass all of that. And we're also going to create a section for the search component. Now what we're going to do within the section tags is we're going to load this search.html partial, which I have created, and it's currently empty. And what we're going to do is use the include tag to do that. So include, and we'll include partials/search.html. This is going to contain the input that the user's going to type the film that they want to search for into that input. We'll get to that in a second. Let's save this. All we're doing is that we're splitting this page into 2 sections using flexbox and justifying the content between them. That creates 2 sections to the page, and we're now going to build out the search.html partial. Now I'm going to copy paste this just so we're being quick about it. It's another div, but within that we have a CSRF token, and we have the input. This is where the user will type what they want to search for. It's of type text, and it has 3 HTMX attributes. The first one determines that it's a post request, and we're going to create this URL in a second. It's called search film. The target is a div with the ID of results. You can see that at the bottom. This is just an empty div, but what we're going to do is when we do the post request to this endpoint, we're going to load the HTML response into this div. And finally, the trigger for the request is going to be the 𝗬𝗍 command. When the user types, we want to make the request, but only after 500 milliseconds of the user not typing any more characters. This can help prevent overwhelming the server. You've seen that in the trigger modifiers video. Finally, we give the input a name of search, and this can be accepted on the server. So let's now create this URL for the search film URL here. What we're going to do is we're going to paste this into the HTMX URL patterns. It's going to have a root of search film, and it's going to load a view called search film in the views.py. So within views.py, we will create that view now. So it's going to be search film, and it will take the request, and we're going to get the search text here, and it's going to be request.post. that will give us the data that was sent, and we'll get the search value that was sent here, and you can see that that matches the name of the field. That's how we get that. So that is what the user has typed in. We now need to return a list of the films that contain that text. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a variable called results, and this is going to be equal to a database query. It's going to be film.objects.filter, and we're going to look for the name, and we want to say that it contains the search text that the user has sent to the server. Now this will match if it's an exact match, but we also want to put an I here. This is a case insensitive search, so this would mean taxi driver, if that was entered in the front end, would match, it would match taxi driver in the database. That's what we want. We don't care about the case, so we will use I contains here, and that will return the results that we want, and we'll set a context of results, variable called results, equal to that there. Finally, we're going to render another partial here, and we'll use the render method for that, and the partial is called search results.html, and we'll pass the context into that. So this is the important part of this partial. We're going to build that in a second, but it contains search results in a variable that we're going to use. So that's all for the view for the moment. We are going to extend that in a minute, but let's now go to this empty search results partial here, and I'm going to paste in this again. So remember, we set in the view a context variable called results. That's what we iterate over here. For film in the results, we're going to show a list that's quite similar actually to what we have here, but one difference is we're going to show a badge that is green, and it allows the user to add the film from the search to their own list. So I'll save that, and now let's see if we can load that up now. And we're getting some pretty ugly styling here, so I'm going to fix the width of this. Let's go back to the film list component. Currently this is column 4 because this previously this spanned the whole page. Let's just make it column 12 now, and remember this is actually taking up 6 columns, so that will span the full width of 6 columns now. You can see that. So now if we start typing a film in here, let's say taxi driver, you actually get a small list component here with a little button that says add. And if we just type in a character like E, we see we get lots of films that are in our database here. Now I'm going to try and add taxi driver, and this is going to highlight another problem with our application. Nothing seems to happen here. It's actually already in the list, but if we look at the terminal here, we see we've got a unique constraint field, and that's because we're trying to create this film called taxi driver again. Let's go through why that's happening. The search results, when you click add film, it goes to the same URL. This goes to here, because remember when we type a film in here, let's just type random data, it's going to create that object in the database. If we go to views.py, the add film endpoint is trying to create this object every time something is passed to it. This is not optimal, because imagine you had 2 users who wanted to add taxi driver to the list. They would both try and create that object. The second person is going to get this integrity constraint failure, because this should be a unique field in the model, as you can see here. Unique equals true in the name field. So the very simple remedy for this is to use get or create, which is another function on Django's model manager. And get or create will first of all perform a lookup in the database to see does this film with that name exist, and if it does, it will just return it, and if it does not, it will create it. And this returns a tuple with two objects. The first object is what we want, that's the instance, that's why we index in at 0. The second object in that tuple is actually just a boolean that tells you whether or not the instance was created. So that will solve that problem for us here. So if we go back to the template now, refresh the page here, and let's type in F, and if we try and add Fargo to the list, you see that it works. We get Fargo and it's returning HTML to this list component and re-rendering it. Now I think it's worth walking through how this is happening, so let's do it right now quickly. What we're doing is we perform a search which goes to the search film endpoint, and this loads in the search view here at the bottom, where we extract what the user has typed and we filter down the objects in the database, just the films that contain that text, and finally we render a search results partial. So what this does, whenever we type in here, we're hitting this endpoint here, which is returning this partial here, search results. All this is doing is that underneath the search box, it's rendering a small list with all of the elements, and it has an add button. When the user clicks the add button, you can see there's some HTMX going on here as well. It sends a post request to the add film endpoint that we defined a couple of videos ago, and it also attaches a value. This is a new HTMX attribute called HXVals, and it allows you to send other data with the request. In this case, we attach a film name and we set it equal to the film's name that we're iterating over. So each film that we iterate over has a button that when we click it, we send that film's name to the add film endpoint. Now the reason we call it film name, just to quickly demonstrate this, if we go back to the original films.html, this is the original way that we added a film up here. We had a text field where we add a name, and then when we click add film, that should add it to the database. This had a name of film name, so we're replicating that here just so that it works on the same view. We only need one view to add a film in that case. So HXVals is a new HTMX attribute, and you can send any JSON data you want through that attribute. Finally, the HXTarget tells us that we're going to render the response into the film list, which you can see as this ID here. So that's quite complicated. I think it's worth walking through that yourself to try and get a handle on how that's working, but the end result is that we can type and search and we get this dynamic filtering going on, and every time we search it is re-rendering the results. Obviously we could make that look even better using proper CSS and a film that had more attributes. Let's try and add The Godfather to the list, but it's already in the list. Now this is a problem. We want to filter out the films that are already in our list. Let's see how we can do that now. We're going to modify the view. So in views.py, we are getting the results, and it's all of the films that contain the text the user has typed in. We're now going to filter that down even further by excluding, using the .exclude method. We're going to exclude all films that are in the user's list of films. So first of all, I'm going to grab all of the user's films in a variable called user films. That's going to be request.user.films.all. That will give me all of the films that I have in my list. In this case, it will be these ones here. And when I've got that, what I want to do is I want to exclude the films that are in my list. So what we can say is we want to exclude all the films in the database where the name is in, and we're going to use another query here, user films dot value list. Okay, it's values list actually, and what we pass in is the name of the field we want. It's name, and we'll flatten that to be true. Now what that's going to do is it's going to exclude all of the database objects where the name is in the values that we have already in our list. So let's see what happens now. If I refresh the page, which you don't technically need to do, but if I start typing taxi driver, you see that there are no search results because we already have that in the list. It's excluded by default. Just to show you how this works, if I go to the shell, the Django shell here, let's expand that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the film.objects.all. Now that gives you all the films in the database. What I can do is I can get the first user. So let's get the user with the name of Mark. It's user.objects.get equals Mark. So that gives us the user, and we can get Mark's films by saying u.films.all. So let's store that in user films. And what we can do with the user films is we can get just the name attribute. So if we look at user films, we get these objects. We only care about the names. So we can say user films.values_list, and we can pass the name field to that. And that corresponds to the model's name field. That's the field that we're interested in. And you can see we get a query set back with these names. The reason we use flat equals true is that just turns it into a normal Python list essentially that we can use to filter out in our query set. If I start the server again, go back to views.py, that explains what this line is doing here. We're extracting the names from the logged in users film list, and we are removing them from the query set. With that done, we have managed to automatically extract out the films that the user has in their list from this search result. So let's now try adding Raging Bull. You see that it appears here, and if I now search for Raging Bull, we don't get any search results. So the last thing I want to do in this tutorial is I want to add Django Messages. Now, messages in Django give you a way of displaying a message one time on a response, and that allows you to see feedback on particular actions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to the film list some messages, and what we want to do is above the list we want to show a message showing which film has been added. So let's go to the film list, and I'm going to paste this in here. And this basically comes from the Django documentation. We check for any messages in the context, and then we iterate over them and display them. Now we've got that. What I want to do now is we want to go to views.py, and it's when we add a film we want to display a message to the user. So let's go to the top here, and I'm going to import the messages from django.contrib. And within add film, what we want to do is we want to, before we return the response, we want to call messages.success. That takes the request as a first parameter. The second parameter is a message. Let's use an f string here, and it says added, and we're going to add the name here. So added name to list of films. So all this is going to do is add a message to the response only on one response here after a user has added a film. So let's see what that looks like now. If I refresh the page, add No Country for Old Men here, and that gives you a nice wee response here where it says that we've added that to the list. Now one thing I'd like to do is I'd like to remove it after, let's say, 3 seconds. You can actually achieve this with HTMX as well. What we're going to do is we're going to wire up another HX attribute to this, and we're going to delete it after 3 seconds. So what we're going to do is we're going to add to this UL here, we're going to add some HTMX attributes. And the first one we're going to hx get, and that's going to go to a URL that we'll create in a minute. And this URL is going to be called clear. It's simply going to return an empty string. So that will wire that up there. And finally hx trigger. What we want to do is we want to trigger this when the page loads. This is another special trigger in HTMX, the load trigger. This is done when the page loads. So when this is rendered, we will trigger this particular request, but we want to delay it, and we want to delay it by 3 seconds. When we add a film, we will now get this message displayed here, but after 3 seconds after the page loads, it's now going to send a GET request to this URL. So let's create that URL now. I'm just going to paste it into the HTMX URL patterns, and it's going to be going to a view called clear. So I'm going to copy that into the views.py, and this is a very simple view, and it's going to return an empty string. At this point you might be thinking, you know, we have a lot of HTMX specific views here. It might be worth breaking them out into their own module. For now we'll just leave everything in the one file, but with HTMX you do get a lot of views sometimes, so it's worth considering how you want to structure your project. At this point we're returning an empty response, so within the film list this messages UL tag should be cleared out after 3 seconds. So let's test that out now. If we refresh the page, I'm going to try and add another film here. Let's say Blue Velvet, and we get the message saying Blue Velvet was added to the list of films. But you see, after 3 seconds, without any page refreshes or reloads or anything like that. It's cleared out because of this hx get request. It returns an empty string which is then swapped into the DOM. So again, you're seeing here how you can build up all this interactive functionality with HTMX. It's very flexible, there's a lot you can do with it. This has been quite a long video, so I'm going to wrap it up now. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, please like and subscribe. And thank you very much for watching. The code will be on GitHub, and we'll see you in the next video.